ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। Today we are going to start a new chapter in Canto 2, the Cosmic Manifestation. And this chapter will primarily be dealing with the Leela Avataras. Okay. So in the last class, we finished that with a comment from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, where he said that the Purushavatara has been described, but this topic is predominantly concerning Maya Shakti. Now the Leela Avataras, who are composed of the Chit Shakti, are described, means the spiritual potency of the Lord. In the 5th and 6th chapter, we have been discussing the manifestations of his material potencies and the Lord's relationship with his Maya Shakti. Now we will discuss the Leela Avataras, which are composed of the Chit Shakti, which is the spiritual potency of the Lord. So this is the breakup. So the first 39 texts will be directly listing the Leela Avataras along with their specific functions. So this is scheduled incarnations with specific functions. So what functions they enact when they come. So the Leela Avataras, the first 39 text verses will deal with that. So this is again, this whole chapter is spoken by Lord Brahma. So after the few questions that Narad Muni asked, the rest of chapter 5, let's look at it a little bit. The first 8 verses in chapter 5 was spoken by Narad Muni. It's inquiries to Lord Brahma. From 9 to 42, which is the rest of the 5th chapter, Lord Brahma's answers are there. And he continues in the 6th chapter and 7th chapter also. Okay, so he concludes here, finally, in this chapter. So Lord Brahma, after listing the Leela Avataras, in next 2 verses, he says that none can completely describe the glories of the Lord. So although we have listed these incarnations and the specific functions, but it is in no way comprehensive. It is in no way the limits of the pastimes of that particular incarnation. So what I have given here is just a generic list with very important specific functions. That's all. Okay. So because none can describe him completely and understand the glories of the Lord also. Only when we understand, then we can describe. So when there is no question of understanding the glories of the Lord completely, description also is not possible to be completely described. But in the next 5 verses, he will say that his surrendered devotees can understand by his mercy. So there are 2 things. One is from our side, or from the living entity's point of view, they have to surrender to the Lord. Still, again, it's dependent on the Lord himself that he reveals himself. In one aspect, it's bhaktya mam abhijanati. Krishna says the devotees know me. Okay, but at the same time, Lord also he says that only to whom he reveals himself, they can understand him. So ultimately, it's not only this conception should not be that although I am surrendered, still these things are not coming or these things are not happening, because we are completely dependent on him. So it's not only our surrender, it's also the Lord's inclination. But it goes hand in hand. It's understood that when a devotee surrenders to the Lord by his mercy reciprocates. Okay. But still ultimately the controller is the Lord. We cannot demand from him that such and such have surrendered, we have surrendered, but still we could not understand him. It's the Lord's mercy. So both go hand in hand. So Brahma says this, and then in the next 3 verses, he will speak about Brahman and Paramatma. Specifically in this chapter, Lord Brahma will speak about Bhagavan, the complete manifestation of the personality of Godhead in his various Leela Avataras. But how is it in relation to Brahman and Paramatma? And those who are dedicated or those who are inclined towards the impersonal feature of the Lord, or inclined towards the Paramatma feature of the Lord, how they are or what is their position in relation to Bhagavan. We will see those in detail when we come to those verses. In text 50, it's basically a summary of all the 3 chapters, chapter 5, 6 and 7. And it will tell that the Supreme Lord is the cause of all causes. Okay, so it's actually Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's point that 50th verse is basically a summary. It's a small verse, it's just one single verse, but it encapsulates the complete understanding of 5th, 6th and 7th chapter. From 51 to 53, then Lord Brahma will order Narad Muni to preach Srimad Bhagavatam and then invoke devotion to Lord Hari in all. Okay, so he says you propagate this. And in this section we will see how Srila Prabhupada writes about the disciplic succession. That this actually one of these verses, Lord Brahma will tell that the Srimad Bhagavatam, the concise or the core or the essence of Srimad Bhagavatam was given to me by the Lord, which we will see in future. So Prabhupada will write that, we will see in future. That is the Chaturshloki. So these chapters 5, 6 and 7 is in one way an explanation of the Bhagavatam which was spoken by the Lord to Lord Brahma. Okay, so that is why we did find a couple of references to the Chaturshloki. So this was received by me, Lord Brahma says, from the Supreme Lord Krishna himself. Now you have to propagate it so that people can take up devotion to Lord Hari. Okay, so with that he ends this chapter. And the next chapter would be Parikshit Maharaj's further questions to Shukdev Goswami. And their response to that would be again the Chaturshloki Bhagavatam will be spoken. Okay. So this chapter is, it does not have many technical details like the ones which we discussed in chapter 5 and 6. Okay, so many of the, or almost all the points, all the points which are given in these verses and the purports, we have already heard them before. Okay, so there's nothing surprising that is coming in this chapter. We have already heard all these things before. So we'll go through it and kind of recap or kind of relive those things which you have already known, because repetition is necessary. So for most of these things, at least the first 39 texts, I'll read the translation and some points from the purport which will strengthen our understanding. Okay, there should be no surprises here. Okay. So text 1, directly, Lord Brahma directly starts speaking about the Leelavatara, and the first one is Varahadev. So Lord Brahma said, when the unlimitedly powerful Lord assumed the form of a boar as a pastime, just to lift the planet Earth, which was drowned in the great ocean of the universe called the Garbhodaka, the first demon, Hiranyaksha, appeared, and the Lord pierced him with his tusk. So Srila Prabhupada makes a point here, and he says that the planets float because of their inner constitution. He says only under certain conditions do the planets float as weightless balls in the air, and as soon as these conditions are disturbed, the planets may fall down into the Garbhodaka ocean, which covers half the universe, which basically suggests that such kind of disturbance was created by Hiranyaksha, due to which the Earth planet fell down into Garbhodaka ocean. And comparing to this, what Hiranyaksha did, Srila Prabhupada compares that to the modern day, to the modern realm, that how minute Hiranyakshas, what are their activities which are meant for basically destruction of this earth planetary system. And he says, the modernized drilling of the earth to exploit oil from within is a sort of disturbance by the modern demons and can result in a greatly harmful reaction to the floating condition of the earth. So the inner constitution, when it's disturbed, then it's comparing to what Hiranyaksha did long time back. Then he speaks about Lord Varaha's activities and how chief incarnations should take note of Lord Varahadev's activities. The incarnation of the Lord appears under certain extraordinary circumstances, like the above mentioned occasion, and the incarnation performs a task which is not even imaginable by the tiny brain of mankind. because this falling of earth into an ocean, it's inconceivable. First of all, people do not even know that there's a Garbhodaka ocean. Okay, and what to speak of this earth, which they think is the only planet with life, and that because of their activities falling into a water, a huge mass of water, and then someone lifting it up. So all these things are inconceivable and not possible. So they cannot imagine. So those foolish incarnations who claim themselves to be Lord Vishnu or Bhagavan, they should take note that the Lord is able to perform these inconceivable activities, but they are not even able to control their own sensual urges, the pains and pleasures of their body. They are influenced by the pains and pleasures of their own body. So then how can they claim themselves to be the Supreme Lord? And there's some technical details about piercing the tusk, how Hiranyaksha was killed. Okay, so here it's mentioned that Hiranyaksha tried to create disturbance in the methodical functions of the Lord, and therefore he was killed by being pierced by the Lord's tusk. But according to Jiva Goswami, Hiranyaksha was killed by the hand of the Lord. Therefore, his version is that after being killed by the hand of the Lord, the demon was pierced by the tusk. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur confirms. So, in his commentary, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that the avatara starting with Varaha, along with their activities, Vibhutis and their devotees are described in summary in this particular chapter. Text 2 will speak about Yajna. Okay, Yajna Murti. Prajapati Ruchi begot Suyajna. Another name of Suyajna is Yajna. In the womb of his wife Akuti. And then Suyajna begot the demigods headed by Suyama in the womb of his wife Dakshina. Suyajna, as the Indradev, diminished very great miseries in the three planetary systems. So, this we discussed, if you remember, when in the third chapter of first canto about Yajna and how he assumed the position of Indra because nobody was qualified to become Indra. And he diminished very great miseries in the three planetary systems, upper, lower, intermediate, and because he so diminished the miseries of the universe, he was later called Hari by the great father of mankind, namely Swayambhuva Manu. Hari is one who takes everything. So he took the miseries of the universe. So nobody should be accepted as an incarnation without the details about his father's name and the place of his appearance. So again, this is in continuation to Srila Prabhupada's purport in the previous verse, where he said the cheap incarnations should take note. One is the Lord's transcendental activities, and another is that the appearance of the Lord is mentioned in revealed scriptures. So nobody can claim himself to be an incarnation of the Lord if his name is not there in the list, so to speak. Okay. Yeah. So in the following descriptions, the birth, activities, parents, and name of each avatara is mentioned. Along with 9 women, sisters, the Lord then appeared as Kapila incarnation, being the son of the Prajapati Brahmana Kardama and his wife Devahuti. He spoke to his mother about self-realization, by which in that very lifetime she became fully cleansed of the mud of the material modes and thereby achieved liberation in the path of Kapila. Okay, Srila Prabhupada speaks about the mud of the material modes. So he gives a comparison that one should follow in the footsteps of Devahuti and Arjuna, and that way they can, simply by following the instructions that the Lord imparts onto his devotees, everybody else, all the other living entities are also benefited. Okay, so he makes examples, or rather, when he speaks Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, through that the whole world is benefited because those teachings are recorded and they are meant for everybody in the world. Similarly, when the instructions which are given to Devahuti, they are as good as the instructions spoken by the Lord to Arjuna in the battlefield of Kurukshetra. So there is no difference. That is why it's called as Bhagavad Sankhya Yoga. We will see that in the third canto. So those instructions which Kapil Dev gave to Devahuti, those are themselves potent enough to give the same result that Bhagavad Gita gives, of basically delivering the ignorant living entity from the clutches of this material world. So what people are supposed to do is simply follow the instructions. And you'll also see the Lord also instructs in the 10th canto. Normally it's assumed that in 10th canto it's only the Leelas of the Lord are there, the sweet pastimes of Krishna with the Gopas, with the Gopis, other killing of demons and those things are there. But along with that, the 10th canto also consists lots of instructions. So in 10th canto is 90 chapters, but there are several chapters in which Lord Krishna gives lots of instructions. So philosophical points are there also. And in his incarnation, or in his when he appears as Krishna, he also spoke to Uddhava, which is there in the 11th canto. So all these instructions are important. Okay. So in Srimad Bhagavatam, those instructions are captured. The instructions that Kapil Dev gave to Devahuti, the instructions that Lord's devotees also gave. Vidura spoke to Dhritarashtra. Okay. Then Narada will speak to Prajina Barhi. Then Lord Shiva will speak to the Prachetas. So many instances will come, and Lord Prahlad Maharaj will speak to his father. Okay. So many things are there. So apart from the prayers, there are instructions also in Srimad Bhagavatam which are perfect in themselves. And by following those instructions which are given by the Lord and his pure devotees, one can obtain the highest benefit, even today. He says. So although this age is condemned in every manner, but Srimad Bhagavatam, which appeared 5,000 years back, it is still, this can give the highest benefit if we just follow the instructions which is given in this transcendental literature. The word Atmagatim is significant in the sense of perfect knowledge of the Supreme. So one should know the Lord as much as can be known by our limited knowledge. It's impossible for the Lord to be known perfectly, even by Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma. Still, by following the principles of the great devotees and the instructions available in the scriptures, one can know to a considerable extent the features of the Lord. So two things. One is the principles, by following the principles of the great devotees, the regulated principles, along with the instructions of the Lord. So these instructions take form of the do's and do nots, along with the philosophical knowledge of basically knowledge of the absolute truth. When you speak about knowledge of the absolute truth, it is knowing all the principles of the absolute truth, which includes the material energy, it includes the Tatastha Shakti, the Jiva, and the internal potency of the Lord, and Vishnu Tattva himself directly. So all these four are to be understood in proper way. So those are the instructions of the Lord, and how the relationships between them, then they act. So these instructions basically take the form of the Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. Okay, so the instructions take the form of these three things, and by engaging in the Abhideya principles, which is following the principles which is given by the great devotees, or which they themselves embody, then one can reach to the level of, one can attain the Prayojana. So such instructions are there. And if we do, when we are seeing such instructions, and if we do an analysis of how these instructions have folded on, we can see that they all fall into the category of Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. And this is what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, that all the Vedic literatures can be categorized into these three. One is Sambandha, which is understanding the principles and the relationships that is there between them. Abhideya, once we understand what actually is the relationship and how one person is supposed to conduct himself, how to do that, and what all he is supposed to do, that is the Abhideya principle. And finally, what he attains, Prayojana. Okay. All these things are explained in the Vedic literatures. So this is what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said. And if we go through this, the narrations in Srimad Bhagavatam, we'll be able to make that distinction between Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. Srila Prabhupada writes, every incarnation of the Lord has his own abode in the spiritual sky. Therefore, Lord Kapila also has his separate Vaikuntha planets. And those pure devotees who go there also live in the same style as the Lord. Krishna's incarnations are divided into Amsha, Kala, Guna, Yuga, Manvantara, and Shaktavesh avatars. So these incarnations are the plenary expansions of the Lord. Amsha, Kala, Guna, Yuga, and Manvantara. Whereas Saktavesha is when a living entity is empowered. When the Lord's associate descends by the order of the Lord, such incarnations are called Shaktavesh avatara. And all these incarnations are supported by invulnerable statements of the authorized scriptures and not by any imagination. So devotional service is the perfect antiseptic, he says, Prabhupada writes here. It's a perfect antiseptic for material infection or mud of material moods. So it's written here, right? She became fully cleansed of the mud of the material modes and thereby achieved liberation. The path of Kapila. So Kapil Dev's instruction to Devahuti is the path of pure devotional service. And through that, one can overcome the contamination by association with the modes of goodness, passion, ignorance. The contamination comes because we are associating with the modes. And the more we associate with pure devotees, the more we associate with the Lord, then the contamination of the material modes automatically go away. That is purification. And this contamination can be washed off completely by knowledge, renunciation and devotional service. So Jnana, Vairagya and Bhakti. And Bhakti itself gives Jnana and Vairagya, as we have discussed in the second chapter of first canto. And this one important point that Srila Prabhupada mentions here is that even in the non-liberated stage, a living entity can be directly engaged in the transcendental loving service of the personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, or his plenary expansions like Rama and Narasimha. So it's not that only when we are beyond the three modes, then we can engage in devotional service of the Lord. Even those living entities who are conditioned by the modes, they can also start or they can also render transcendental loving service. So now this might, see, if you see this verse, Mamcha vyo vibhicharina bhakti yogina sevate sagunan samatityetan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. So this is one verse that one who engages bhakti yogina sevate, one who engages in devotional service, Sagunan Samati Tyaitan, he goes beyond the modes of material nature and he attains this Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate. He attains the level of Brahman. Means he attains a transcendental position. But at the same time, in the 18th chapter, we also see that only one who has attained to Brahma Bhuta, then he can engage in devotional service. Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma Nashusritina Kankshati Sama Sarveshu Bhuteshu Bhakti Labhate Param. Okay, so he attains devotional service unto the Lord. So how do we understand this? So, according to Acharyas, specifically, we will not be able to get into details of this, and I hope you have discussed this during your Bhakti Shastra course itself. The thing is that there are different stages of devotional service, okay, and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur actually gives elaborate description, splitting each and every stage of devotional service. So, generally, it's considered that actual devotional service starts only when a devotee reaches the level of bhava and then goes to prema. From there, the actual devotional service to the Lord starts because it's uncontaminated from anything selfish, from the living entity's point of view. Okay, so that is the aspect. So in true sense, in the actual sense of the term bhakti, where there is a loving reciprocation between the Lord and the devotee, that starts only when the living entity is completely free from all kinds of material contamination. Okay, so from there bhakti starts. But as the Lord is so merciful, and He Himself is speaking here in this 26th verse of 14th chapter, those who are still contaminated or still influenced by the modes of material nature, they can also engage in devotional service. Bhakti Yogena Sevate. And Bhakti Yoga is so perfect and so potent that even those, although they are not still beyond the three modes of material nature, they are still infected by the mud of the material modes. By rendering devotional service, by engaging in Bhakti Yoga, they can overcome Sagunan Samati Tyaitan. They can overcome the three modes of material nature. They can become transcendental to the three modes and they attain the Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate. They attain the transcendental position. So even in the non-liberated stage, that's why this comment is very important, that even in the non-liberated stage, a living entity can be directly engaged in the transcendental loving service of the personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna. So he can be directly engaged, he says. So there is no limitation or there is no hindrance for any living entity to engage in devotional service of the Lord, although he might be contaminated by the modes of material nature. Okay, so that's the glory of devotional service. Whereas in the other paths, if we see about Jnana and Yoga, we see the path of Jnana and Yoga. Now, to reach a specific position, then there are so many rules which have to be followed, and only according to this, when we say about Jnana Marg, we are speaking about this impersonalists, and when we speak about impersonalists, we basically come to the Sampradaya of Shankaracharya. According to him, one can engage in spiritual activities only when he takes sannyas. Right? Only when he takes sannyas, because others who are engaged in materialistic activities, they are still not full knowledge, because they think that something can be gained from their materialistic activities also, from their fruitive activities. By following the Vedic literatures, that itself contaminates them by the three modes. And they give proper explanation that Vedavada Rataha, those who are engaged in fruitive activities according to the Vedic literatures, no, they are not spiritually situated, which is a fact. But then when this is dovetailed in relationship to the Lord, then they are spiritually situated. But because the Mayavadis or the impersonalists, they do not accept the form of the Lord as transcendental, they accept it as Maya. According to them, those who are not a sannyasi, who are not engaged in studying the Vedanta Sutra, all other varnas and ashramas are basically contaminated. So there is no way that they can engage in spiritual activities. So Jnana is ruled out. Through Jnana, it's not possible. For yoga also, then there is yam, niyam, asana, so many things have to be followed. And only when that is done, then one comes to the stage of dharana, and then to dhyan and samadhi, then there is some service, not a semblance of service to the Lord. There is some realization about the Paramatma feature of the Lord, or the impersonal Brahman, as we discussed in 5th chapter. But the Bhakti Yoga is so perfect that even this non-liberated stage, where the living entity is engaged in his daily duties, apparently material activities, apparently in contact with the material objects, he can still engage in devotional service and directly engage in devotional service to please the Lord. Right? This is what is mentioned here. Directly engage in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Although it may seem that he is engaging himself in materialistic activities, but by dovetailing it for the pleasure of the Lord, he engages in devotional service and he makes transcendental progress. He makes spiritual progress. So Bhakti Yoga is independent of Varna and Ashrama. That is why Bhakti Yoga is said to be above Varna and Ashrama. It's not a limitation for a specific Varna or for a specific Ashrama to perform devotional service. Anybody can do it. And that is why it is very wonderful. So one who engages in this transcendental devotional service, he makes definitive progress towards Brahmagatim or Atmagatim, to the soul's destination. Atmagatim, the soul's destination is to surrender to the lotus feet of the Lord, go to the abode of the Lord. The antiseptic potency of devotional service to the Lord is so great that it can neutralize the material infection even in the present life of a devotee. A devotee does not need to wait for his next birth for complete liberation. So devotional service is so perfect that it can neutralize the material infection even in the present life. Even in the present life, one can go beyond the three modes. He does not have to wait for the next life. That's where this Jivan Mukta, Rupa Goswami speaks about this Jivan Mukta in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, that within this life, by perfecting the process of devotional service, one can become liberated. Although it might seem that he has a material body, but still he is liberated from all material modes. Then, the great sage Atri prayed for offspring, and the Lord, being satisfied with him, promised to incarnate as Atri's son, Dattatreya. Datta, the son of Atri, that is Dattatreya. Datta, the son of Atri, is Dattatreya. Atreya, Dattatreya. And by the grace of the lotus feet of the Lord, many Yadus, Hayahayas, etc. became so purified that they obtained both material and spiritual blessings. So Srila Prabhupada here speaks about the Lord as the father, or the Lord as the son of his devotee who becomes the father. Normally the Lord is considered as the father, whereas the son is the living entities. Son is the living entities. But here Srila Prabhupada writes that because the Lord is unlimited, he has an unlimited number of father devotees. But the Lord is the father of all living entities, but out of transcendental affection and love between the Lord and his devotees, the Lord takes more pleasure in becoming the son. So this we have already discussed before. The son only demands all sorts of services from the father, but a pure devotee is inclined to serve the Lord and wants him as his son so that he can serve the Lord as his son. When the devotee becomes more than the Lord, again, impersonalists desire to become one with Lord, but the devotees can become more than the Lord. And the more they become more than the Lord, then the intensity of that rasa, it increases more and more. That's why we have these 5 rasas, and as the devotee becomes more and more than the Lord, then this madhurya rasa, vatsalya rasa, sakhya rasa is considered more intense, or it's considered on a higher level. To create different planetary systems, I had to undergo austerities and penance, and the Lord, thus being pleased with me, incarnated as the 4 Sanas, Sanaka, Sanandana, Sanatana and Sanat Kumara. In the previous creation, the spiritual truth was devastated, but the 4 Sanas explained it so nicely that the truth at once became clearly perceived by the sages. So the 4 sages, the Kumaras, are basically the incarnation of the Lord of his knowledge potency, of his transcendental knowledge. So Srila Prabhupada writes about Sanatana and Sanatana Tama. He says Sanatana Tama. Tama means that which is superlative. So the living entity is Sanatana, the Lord is also Sanatana, but the Lord is Sanatana Tama because the living entity has the tendency to fall down into the atmosphere of non-eternity. Prabhupada writes, the atmosphere of material realm. So therefore his Sanatana, his Tatastha Shakti, he is the marginal potency of the Lord. Living entity is the marginal potency. So therefore his Sanatana, the feature of his Sanatana, Sat feature of the living entity is prone to be covered. The living entity is prone to get covered. It does not mean that he must be covered, but there is a tendency. Srila Prabhupada explains this, the tendency for the living entity to fall down. So therefore he should always protect himself. So therefore the living entities are positively Sanatana, but not superlatively. The living entities are quantitatively different from the superlative Sanatana, the Lord. Brahmaji wanted to create the whole cosmic creation as it was in the previous millennium. And the main, we have discussed this in the 6th chapter also, that the main purpose of creation is for the living entities to become liberated. Correct? The purpose of creation is to liberate the living entities. And just so that they do not become too stressed out with this purpose, some material objects are also given here and there so that they can engage in sense gratification. But that's not the purpose. But the living entity is bewildered by the modes, and because he does not have the desire to serve the Lord, he thinks that engaging in sense gratification or materialistic activities is the actual purpose, and liberation is for those who have failed in their material sense gratification. Correct? That's the natural course of how people think, that devotees are escapists. Because they cannot achieve anything materially, they are frustrated in their material life. Therefore, people become sadhus. And people take up devotional service and go here and there, do puja part and other things. Because materially they are not satisfied. It's a prevalent opinion in this material realm. So not much respect is given to the sadhus. But actually, it's the other way around. That's what Srila Prabhupada said. Who is crazy? People think devotees are crazy because they are doing so many activities which look very different from what normal materialistic people do. But actually, who is crazy? Those people who do not understand the purpose of this material world, they are the people who are crazy. They do not know how to live in this world. Crazy means for those who are crazy, they are put into mental asylum, correct? Because they are not ready to serve the purpose of that society, right? So they are put somewhere else. So the purpose of the material world itself is to become liberated, to liberate the living entities. And because they are crazy enough to not understand this point, even if it's being told to them, so therefore they do their crazy activities within this material realm itself, and by that the whole society is put into chaos. So the more and more people become crazy, or rather it's the other way around, as the yuga progresses from Satya, Treta, Dwapar and Kali, the craziness of people increases more and more. And as people become more and more crazy, what happens is the society is put into chaos. It's just like crazy people are outside roaming around in this material world, or rather roaming around in the society. What will happen? It will put the whole society into chaos, right? You can just understand, even if a crazy person is walking on the road, Nobody can go there, nobody can drive, nothing can happen, no, there's no order. So that's why as crazy people increases, the number of craziness, the amount of craziness increases in the material world, the chaos increases in the society. So it's the other way around actually. The devotees are the sane people. The sane people should take up the devotional service. Prabhupada writes in multiple places. Sanity and the opposite of sanity is craziness. So those who are sane, they understand that the purpose of the creation is to liberate oneself. Whereas those who are crazy, they want to become more and more crazy. They want to entangle themselves in this material realm. So therefore, in every millennium of creation, transcendental knowledge is a prime necessity if the ever-conditioned souls are to be given a chance for liberation. So therefore, the four sanas appeared and they were incarnations of the knowledge of the Supreme Lord, and they propagated this transcendental devotion service to the Lord. I think it's mentioned in one of the Puranas, I don't remember which one, that originally the Srimad Bhagavatam was spoken by the Kumaras in the assembly of great sages in Haridwar. And then, it was spoken again by Shukdev Goswami, Vyasadeva Goswami. I don't know, I don't understand, I don't know the order. But the Kumaras spoke Srimad Bhagavatam, that much is clear.
Narada has some question.
Yes, so Narada actually he goes to Vrindavan and he sees only Bhakti is the mother and Jnana and Vairagya are her sons. So there is no Jnana and Vairagya and Bhakti is very distressed. It comes in Bhagavatam Mahatmya, which we normally don't discuss because Prabhupada did not give it much importance. So we don't discuss that. But it is taken from one of the Puranas. And I don't know about this story, specifically this story of Bhakti, Jnana and Vairagya and Narad Muni visiting and all. But it is there in the Shastras that the four Kumaras spoke Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay. 11th canto, only 4th canto, they gave instructions to Prithu Maharaj. So the instructions, possibly, yeah. So it's there. So the Kumaras, they spoke this Bhagavatam. So they also spoke. So they are incarnations of the knowledge of the Supreme Lord. And by following in the footsteps of the four Kumaras, one can at once see the Supreme Personality of Godhead within oneself. So transcendental knowledge reveals the Lord within the heart. And we will see actually in the later verses of this chapter itself, that knowledge in itself is not the criteria. Okay, knowledge has to be applied. Just by gaining knowledge, one cannot understand the Lord. It will come because when in the 40 to 46 verses, sorry, not 40 to 46, 42 to 46, right? His surrendered devotees can understand by his mercy. So there a section will come where Srila Prabhupada will write that just by gaining knowledge, it's not enough. One has to apply himself in that knowledge. One has to follow the practice. One has to do sadhana bhakti with the basis as transcendental knowledge, and that reveals the Lord. Bhaktya Mam Abhijanati. Again, we come back to the same point. Only devotional service reveals the Lord. Not specifically, not only knowledge. Okay, only knowledge is not possible. And this is, anyways, we'll continue. There's a story, there's a story, right? There was a scholar who had studied all the Sandarbhas of Jiva Goswami, and but he was a drunkard, he was a smoker, he was a meat eater. You've not heard of this story? Okay. I think this is a story told by, I think Guru Maharaj told this, or I don't know whether who told this, or Srila Prabhupada himself told this. So they said that although there will be scholars who do this study, okay, so if a scholar is engaged in studying the Shat Sandarbhas of Jiva Goswami, definitely a Sanskrit scholar, and definitely he knows in depth of the philosophy of Chintya Bheda and Veda Tattva. So he has now got the transcendental knowledge. But that knowledge, because he has not applied himself to that knowledge, he is still a non-devotee. He has no faith. Again, the principle of faith will also come in this chapter. That one who is faithful, or one has faith on the Lord, then he can advance in devotional life. So transcendental knowledge is important, but it's not the only criteria. One must have faith, and with that faith, he should surrender unto the Lord. And with the transcendental knowledge as the basis, he should engage in devotional service. So ultimately, it comes to the same point. Devotional service is most important. So with devotional service, through devotional service, jnana and vairagya will come. Okay, this we have all again seen in the previous verse also we saw. So just devotional service is complete in itself. One need not engage in knowing, or one need not engage in gaining transcendental knowledge. But again, in future verses it will come that the knowledge which Lord Brahma is speaking to Narada, it cultivates an appreciation for the Lord. It speaks about the pastimes of the Lord with respect to his material energy and his spiritual potency. So that way it creates an appreciation, it creates an inclination to serve that great personality who is doing all these things. So therefore transcendental knowledge acts as an impetus for becoming more sincere in devotional service. So it supports devotional service, but bhakti is independent itself. So bhakti does not come from transcendental knowledge. Okay, bhakti is independent itself, and through bhakti everything else can be achieved. Knowledge, vairagya, mystic potencies, material opulences. Even by devotional service, even a person who has material desires, he can accomplish whatever he wants. Okay, even his material opulences are fulfilled. To exhibit his personal way of austerity and penance, he appeared in twin forms as Narayana and Nara in the womb of Murti, the wife of Dharma, and the daughter of Daksha. Celestial beauties, the companions of Cupid, went to try to break his vows, but they were unsuccessful, for they saw that many beauties like them were emanating from him, the personality of Godhead. So, Srila Prabhupada, in this purport, he concentrates on the vow of celibacy. Austerity and penances basically means that human life is meant for tapasya with great vow of celibacy or brahmacharya. In the rigid life of tapasya, there is no place for the association of women. Okay, so one who wants to advance in spiritual life, he must give up the association of women. Association of women basically means becoming attached to women. Okay. So, and because human life is meant for tapasya, prescribed, this Sanatana Dharma or Varnashrama Dharma prescribes rigid disassociation from women in the 3 stages of life. So, if one person's life is taken to be of 100 years, then he can have some association with women only when he's a grahastha for 25 years. Rest of the 75 years, he's supposed to be detached from women. Brahmacharya ashram, no association with women. Then Vanaprastha and Sannyas, again, no attachment, no association with women. So 3 stages, they prescribe rigid disassociation. And a brahmachari training is just to understand that women is the real binding force in material existence. So this is a very important point, because he is not saying, Srila Prabhupada, there can be so many things which can be spoken about brahmachari life. But one of the most important thing he's saying is that a man may be trained as brahmachari under the guidance of the bona fide spiritual master, just to understand that women is the real binding force in material existence. If one person has this understanding, then everything else falls into place. So if one wants to get freedom from the material bondage of conditioned life, he must get free from the attraction for the form of women. Because women is the enchanting principle for the living entities. And the male form, especially in the human being, is meant for self-realization. So women is the enchanting principle. So to keep Maya Devi, to keep living entities within this material realm, then she manifests the form of a woman. And that's it. That bewilders the whole world. And as we discussed in the previous chapter, which chapter, right? Yes, 5th chapter. I don't know. Okay, previous chapter. We saw the vow of celibacy. We discussed about the vow of celibacy. Correct? So, this is the most important. In human form of life, okay, this is the most important principle. To maintain this vow of celibacy. Otherwise, those who cannot maintain, or those who, this is in the 6th chapter we saw, yes. Those who cannot, or 5th or 6th, 5th, okay. 5th. With respect to the universal form, correct? With respect to the universal form, when the Lord created that pleasure-giving substance, it's a coating on the genitals, and it or it covers the misery of begetting children. In that purport we saw, correct? I don't know whether it's 6th chapter or 5th chapter, but it's related to the Virat Rupa, the universal form. So this is the enchanting principle. So therefore, one should avoid association with women. The whole world is moving under the spell of womanly attraction. And as soon as a man becomes united with women, he becomes victim of material bondage under a tight knot, Hridaya Granthi. A knot is formed in the heart. Okay. So the desires for lording it over the material world and the intoxication of false sense of lordship, everything begins after a man is united with a woman. So therefore, he should avoid it completely, not as much as possible. You can avoid it completely, that's the best. Training as brahmachari culminates in vanaprastha and sannyas. Under strict observance of discipline, he comes to understand the values of life along with taking specific training for a livelihood. So this is what he does in the shelter, under the shelter of a bona fide guru. In the first 25 years, he comes to understand the values of life. And one who understands the values of life, he will not be enchanted by a woman. And he takes specific training for a livelihood so that he can maintain himself. And the brahmachari is allowed to go home and enter the householder life and get married. And those who do not get married are Naishtika brahmacharis. Yes, and another point is it's decided by the bona fide guru whether one should remain as a Naishtika brahmachari or whether he should get married. So it's not our own speculation. Okay, it's not our own this thing, because the guru, the brahmachari is under the shelter of the guru. So then whatever he decides, then as a service, it's done for the guru. Perfect householder. So, okay, now in this first 2 paragraphs, Srila Prabhupada speak about how one should become free from the attraction for the form of women. But if one enters by the permission of the guru, by the order of the guru, if he enters a householder life, how he should conduct his family life. So, a householder who associates with women under scriptural restrictions after thorough training brahmacharya cannot be a householder like the cats and dogs. After 50 years of age, he should retire from the association of women into vanaprastha. And when the practice is complete, then he takes sannyas, even from his married wife. Okay, so this is the perfect householder life. Lord who can produce spiritual beauties is not attracted to false material beauty. So this is the glory of the Lord. So the living entity should practice austerity and penances to basically struggle to basically get himself free from attraction to women. But for the Lord, he is not indulged, or he does not have to perform austerity and penances. Now this text might give an idea that his personal way of austerity, he performed, Naranara Rishi performed austerities and penances. So one might think that maybe they have to get out of attraction for women. But it is not that. The verse again, it tells that celestial beauties were sent to break their vows, but they were unsuccessful because they saw that many beauties like them were emanating from the personality of Godhead. So it's not that the Lord is bewildered by women. In fact, the Lord can create much, much more beautiful women than they are available in this material world. So therefore, he is not attracted to false material beauties. So Srila Prabhupada gives an example of a confectioner. A confectioner is one who sells chocolates or who sells sweets. Okay, so one who is selling the sweet is not attracted by sweets. So similarly, the Lord who can produce such innumerable beauties, he is not attracted by the material beauty. So that, and this verse specifically targets those who think that Lord Krishna enjoyed with women in his Ras Leela because he is attached to those women in a mundane way. It's not like that. Lord can produce so many beauties, so many women who are much, much more beautiful than one we have seen in this material world. So what to speak? This pastimes of Lord Krishna with Gopi should be understood in that way. That is why before we come to 10th canto, all these things are already discussed in the first 9 cantos, because it gives a very clear perspective, position of the Lord is given. So in one way, these cantos from 1 to 9, they are preparing us with the perfect understanding of Krishna. And that way, when we come to 10th canto, we will have no misconceptions about his position or about his transcendental nature. because all the misconceptions are already removed by these conversations between Brahma, Narada, then Narada and Vidura, Maitreya. So many conversations, all these misconceptions about the Lord are removed, and several things will seem like repeating again and again. Okay, but this repetition is done so that this thing sticks, or it firmly roots in our mind. And that way, when we read about Krishna's Leela in Vrindavan, then we always have this conception at the back of the mind that the Lord is a Supreme Lord and is beyond the three modes. His pastimes, his mood, his affection, his emotions are all transcendental. They are no way the way we think. There are no way that we understand in our present stage. So that's why in the first 9 cantos, we finish the first 9 cantos, we are supposed to go beyond the 3 modes by the time we finish the 9 cantos. That's the ideal situation. Okay. By the time we finish 9 cantos, we should be in a transcendental position to understand the pastimes of the Lord. So this course and this what we are discussing now is supposed to help that. Supposed to understand the transcendental position, supposed to understand, even though we cannot understand him completely, but to understand that we cannot understand him himself, itself gives a very good benchmark that we cannot understand his transcendental pastimes, the 10th canto also. They must be understood only from the level of, or when a person goes beyond the 3 modes. At that time, the transcendental nature of these pastimes can be understood. Otherwise, it cannot be understood. So these cantos are basically preparing us for that. Great stalwarts like Lord Shiva can by their wrathful glances overcome lust and vanquish him. Yet they cannot be free from the overwhelming effects of their own wrath. Such wrath can never enter into the heart of him, the Lord, who is above all this. So how can lust take shelter in his mind? So this is an explanation to the previous verse. So we will see in this 39 verses which Lord Brahma speaks. For some of the incarnations, he will spend 2 or 3 verses. For Naranara Rishi, there are 2 verses. For Vaman Dev, he'll speak about 3 verses, I think. Lord Ramachandra will speak 3 verses. And I think, for when he comes finally to Lord Krishna, he'll speak 10 verses, basically giving a summary of all the pastimes. So those incarnations of the Lord, which remove all kinds of misconceptions or misconceptions from heart, he'll spend more time. And also, it's understood that Lord Brahma relishes those pastimes more. That's why he's spending more time in explaining those pastimes. He's not just giving a list that this happened, this Leela came, this, or one verse to give the name of the incarnation and its function. Definitely it can be done, but then he spends more time. So we can get some idea that Lord Brahma relishes those pastimes more. Okay. So Lord Vishnu has neither lust nor anger. Okay. And Srila Prabhupada speaks about Bhrigu Muni, who wanted to test who is the supreme among the 3, Lord Brahma, Lord Vishnu and Lord Shiva. And then he commits offenses to each one of them by body, mind and words. Through his body, he offends Lord Vishnu. Okay, like that. And he says that. So that way, the Lord is tolerant. He never becomes angry. Just to prove the point that he never becomes angry. Wrath basically means angry. The Lord therefore is never affected by any kind of wrath. So how can there be any place for lust, which is less strong than wrath? When lust or desire is not fulfilled, there is appearance of wrath or anger. But when there is no wrath, then there is no anger. The Lord is known as Aptakama, or one who can fulfill his desires by himself. So therefore, he does not have to lust after anything. And he does not have to become angry. Only when lust is unsatisfied, then it leads to anger. But because the Lord does not lust after anything, he is already Aptakama. He can fulfill his desires by himself. He is complete in himself. So there is nothing outside of him which is required to satisfy him. So therefore, there is no lust in him. But for others, there is always something which is not within them or which is not within their scope and they need something from outside. Means they are dependent on something. And when they are dependent on something for our own purposes, then lust arises. And when the lust is not satisfied, then anger arises. But one who is complete in himself and he is not dependent on anybody, then there is no question of him getting influenced by lust and anger. Correct? So this also proves the point that the Lord is complete in himself. He is not dependent on anybody, but everybody is dependent on him. Because if he is dependent on anybody, then there is a chance of his dependency being unsatisfied. But it's never like that. Okay. All his desires are always fulfilled. He is Aptakama. His desires are also unlimited, and all his unlimited desires are also fulfilled. And even if sometimes a show of lust and anger is there in the absolute, it should be considered an absolute benediction. So even if there is apparently, it looks like the Lord is lusty or angry, it is for the benefit of the other person. It's not that the Lord is trying to satisfy his lust or satisfy his anger. So again, coming back to this previous point, by his pastimes in Vrindavan between the gopis, he is not trying to satisfy himself. He is not trying to satisfy his lust. And while killing the demons, he was not expressing his anger in the same mundane way that everybody else expresses. We will see when we are speaking about Lord Krishna, or even when Nrsimhadev appeared, the anger which is exhibited by the Lord in these pastimes is not the anger which is mundanely conceived. This anger is also transcendental, because the Lord is completely independent. He is Swarat. He is not dependent on anybody. So it's not that because the Lord is frustrated, therefore he is showing his anger. The frustration is also transcendental in that way, because his affection comes out in the affection for Prahlad Maharaj, in case of Nrsimhadev, comes out as the transcendental emotion of anger against Hiranyakashipu. Okay, so that love, that anger is born out of love for his devotees. It is not born out of the frustration that he has, or he might have, or which is conceived by mundane people, that he will be lusty, that his desires are not satisfied, therefore he is angry. No, his anger is also derived, or it also arises because of his love and affection for his devotees. So ultimately, love or affection for his devotees is what brings out different emotions in the Lord. Okay, so that way now one can say that the Lord is dependent on his devotees. But still, from the Tattva's point of view, we understand that the devotees are ultimately sheltered by the Lord. So he is actually not dependent on them. In the terms of rasa, then the understanding changes a little bit, but those are higher topics. When we are speaking about the position of the Lord, then he is not influenced by mundane lust and anger. So that we should understand, because he is not dependent on anything outside of him. We saw that the Lord is everything, or everything is his energy. So everything is within him, and he is not within anything also. We saw that, right? Last class we saw this example. At this verse, we saw that 4th verse in 9th chapter. Maya tatam idam sarvam jagat avyakta murtya masthani tu pradhana masthani bhutani nachaham teshva avastita. Everything situated in him, but he is not in everything. So everything is in him. So therefore he is not dependent on anybody. He is Aptakama. Everything is satisfied within him itself. Okay, maybe we should move a bit fast. Okay. Being insulted by sharp words spoken by Sko, wife of the king, even in his presence, Prince Dhruva, though only a boy, took to severe penances in the forest. And the Lord, being satisfied by his prayer, awarded him the Dhruva planet, which is worshipped by great sages, both upward and downward. So this is the incarnation of Prishnigarbha, who came to benedict Dhruva Maharaj. So Srila Prabhupada speaks about this Leela here in the first couple of paragraphs. And he says about Dhruva planet, it's a fixed Vaikuntha planet installed in the material atmosphere by the will of the Supreme Lord, and even though it's there within the material realm, it will not be annihilated at the time of devastation. So it remains fixed in its place. And all the planets are below Dhruva's planet, but Bhrigu's planet is situated above Dhruva's planet. Some planets are there above Dhruva's planet also. Achieving the highest perfection, one can attain simply by being guided by a pure devotee, just as in the case of Dhruva Maharaj, he was guided by Narad Muni, and one who automatically approaches by dint of one's serious determination to meet the Lord by all means. So these two things we learn from the pastime of Dhruva Maharaj. One important point was he was guided by Narad Muni, first by Suniti, his mother, and then by Narad Muni to worship the Lord through this mantra Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. and then Dhruva's determination. So one important thing that we should learn from Dhruva Maharaj is his determination to see the Lord, to have an audience with the Lord. So that determination should be there. So that's why Dhruva is fixed. Just like Dhruva planet is fixed, similarly Dhruva is fixed in his determination. This is one thing which we should learn from him. Maharaj Vena went astray from the path of righteousness, and the Brahmanas chastised him by the thunderbolt curse. By this, King Vena was burnt with his good deeds and opulence, and was en route to hell. Thunderbolt curse, I will see. Vajra, it's kind of, no? Vajra nishplushta. Vakya Vajra, words of cursing. Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt words. The words were like thunderbolt. And Vena was burnt and he was en route to hell. But the Lord, by his causeless mercy, descended as his son by the name of Prithu, delivered the condemned King Vena from hell, and exploited the earth by drawing all kinds of crops as produce. So in Bhagavatam, we have this Prithu Maharaj deriving all kinds of opulence, crops as produce from the earth. So that is there, just like milking the cows. The narration will come in the 4th canto. And his delivering of King Vena is actually discussed in Vamana Purana, right? Prabhupada mentions that, I think. Yes, in Vamana Purana, the history is mentioned along with how Prithu Maharaj delivered him. Srila Prabhupada speaks about the relationship between Brahmanas and the Kshatriyas in a proper kingdom. So again, you can skip this because we discussed this in the 1st canto itself, that Brahmana is supposed to guide the Kshatriyas. And when the Kshatriyas are not performing their prescribed duties properly, then the Brahmanas can overthrow them. And the Brahmanas were not paid servants of the king, and therefore they had the strength to dictate to the king. So when Brahmanas gain their prowess or their authority by not accepting or not being dependent on the Kshatriyas, they don't get a salary from the Kshatriyas. They get charity, but charity is not a salary. Okay, and Brahmanas, even when they get charity, they are supposed to give everything else in charity also, whatever they gain. So they have this duty of dana and pratigraha. Pratigraha they can accept, but they also have to do dana. So the king will give, the Kshatriyas will give charity, but the Brahmanas are independent of that charity. They are not the paid servants. That's how Brahmanas used to be. And that is why they can have the strength to dictate to the king on what they should do. Yeah, and he says, long life, obedience, good reputation, righteousness, prospects of being promoted to higher planets, and blessings of great personalities are all vanquished simply by disobedience to a great soul. So this we can relate to our spiritual master. Okay, disobedience to a great soul. If we become disobedient to a spiritual master, obviously there's no gati, nagati kutopi, that's not there. But at the same time, even if we want long life, or good reputation, righteousness, everything is vanquished by disobedience to the great soul. So be very careful. So Vamana Purana mentions all these details. Okay, so Vena was suffering from leprosy in the family of Mlecha after he suffered in hell. So King Prithu delivered him. So this is the definition of Putra. Okay, we'll move forward. The Lord appeared as the son of Sudevi, the wife of King Nabhi, and was known as Rishabdev. He performed materialistic yoga to equibalance the mind. This stage is also accepted as the highest perfectional situation of liberation, wherein one is situated oneself and is completely satisfied. So this is the process of Jada Yoga. Jada Yoga means where the person, he becomes just like a Jada, like a dumb stone. So this yoga of becoming a dumb stone is indifferent to anything material. So Rishabdev, Rishabdev performed this. So there are many yogis who, out of many self-reliant methods, practice plucking out the hairs on their heads without shaving and without any instrument help. Yeah, Jains do that. But the real purpose of such Jada Yoga practice is to get free from all material affection and to be completely situated in the self. So this is the main purpose. Again, no, the purpose should be known. For whatever people do, the purpose should be known. And when the purpose is not known, then it's a disturbance. It's a disturbance to everybody. Okay, when I think in the 16th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, right, those who engage in horrible austerities and penances, they do disturbance for themselves as well as the super soul. Right? So it's a disturbance for everybody actually. So the purpose should be known for what one person is doing, or what one's supposed to do, for what purpose is supposed to do these things. The purpose is not known, then it's just useless. So Rishabhadev's glories are mentioned, and real purpose of Jada Yoga is to subdue the senses. One overcomes all kinds of disgust. It's mentioned when Rishabhadev was passing by the road, people used to pass urine, stool on him, put all kinds of garbage on his head, and he used to lay around in his own stool. So indifferent to anything, sense objects and senses, even though they are in physical contact, okay, but still the mind is completely detached from the sense objects. So this is the process of Jada Yoga, where the senses are completely subdued. Subduing the senses is, even though senses may be in contact physically with the sense objects, still the mind is not agitated. That is called subduing the senses. They are attracted, this pratyahar, they are attracted from the sense objects. So retraction does not mean physically they are separated. It helps, the physical separation helps. But then actual retraction is when the mind or the senses are not agitated, even if they come in contact with the sense objects. So that's stage of Paramahamsa. When we were discussing about association with women, okay, so one who is a Paramahamsa, even if he might be in association with women, still his mind will not be agitated, his senses will not be agitated. So physical separation in the case of women, definitely it's helpful for those who are conditioned by the modes. But one who has come to the level of Paramahamsa, then even if he is contact, still he does not get affected. So this purpose of Jada Yoga is automatically achieved through Bhakti Yoga, again, the same point. In this age, specifically, this Jada Yoga cannot be of any practical value. So it's not. But on the other hand, the practice of Bhakti Yoga is feasible because it is just suitable for this age. The simple method of hearing from the right source will lead one to the highest perfection stage of yoga. Okay, and in some places it's mentioned that the mother is Meru Devi, some places it's Sudevi, but they are the same person under different names. The Lord appeared as Hayagriva incarnation and sacrifice performed by me, Brahma. He is the personified sacrifices. And the hue of his body is golden. He is the personified Vedas as well, and the super soul of all demigods. When he breathed, all the sweet sounds of the Vedic hymns came out of his nostrils. So devotees, they serve the purpose of sacrifice, and therefore the demigods are also pleased. At the end of the millennium, Satyavrata, the future Vayvasata Manu, would see that the Lord in the fish incarnation is the shelter of all kinds of living entities, up to those in the earthly planets. Because of my fear of the vast water at the end of the millennium, the Vedas came out of my mouth, and the Lord enjoyed those vast waters and protects the Vedas. This foretelling is by the past experience of Brahmaji, who knew that in that fearful, devastating scene, the Vedas would come out of his mouth. But that the Lord in his fish incarnation would save not only the Vedas, but also all living entities, namely the demigods, animals, men, and great sages. Okay, so one more point that we have to understand is that we discussed about this anthropomorphism. You remember in the fifth. Similarly, this when people hear, people who are not devotees of the Lord, who have no faith in the incarnations of the Lord, when they hear about Varaha Avatar, Matsya Avatar, Nrsimha Avatar and all, then they implement or they think of this concept of zoomorphism. Zoomorphism is when animalistic attributes or animalistic qualities are attributed to the Lord that way. And they think Matsya form is mundane, Varaha form is mundane, like this. What the Lord coming as a pig, how can it be understood? The same way, anthropomorphism and zoomorphism are like two sides of the same coin, where there's a misconception that the Lord, when he takes these forms, then he either becomes like a mundane human being, or either he becomes, or he's contaminated by taking the form of Matsya. Specifically, fishes are considered very abominable, the most abominable species actually. So when the Lord comes as Matsya, then people, how can he take up this most abominable form? Therefore the Lord, his other forms might be transcendental, but this form is contaminated. So people are influenced by this zoomorphism, they think like this. But it's not so. It is his activities, even when he comes in the form of a fish, what does he do? He saves the Vedas, right? And he protects all the living entities. And he protects the Vedas. So how can he be mundane? The primeval Lord then assumed the tortoise incarnation in order to serve as a resting place for the Mandara mountain, which was acting as a churning rod. The demigods and demons were churning the ocean of milk with the Mandara mountain in order to extract nectar. The mount moved back and forth, scratching the back of Lord Tortoise, who, while partially sleeping, was experiencing an itching sensation. So here Srila Prabhupada writes about this, following great authorities to gain perfect knowledge. Srimad Bhagavatam gives much information which may not tally with our present experience. But as far as Indian sages are concerned, knowledge is received from Vedic literatures, and the authorities accept without any hesitation that we should look through the pages of authentic book of knowledge, Shastra Chakshurvat. We cannot deny the existence of ocean of milk. Similarly, we cannot deny the existence of Lord Tortoise, Kurmadev, unless and until we have experimentally seen all the planets hovering in space. And this experiment is not possible. So therefore, we should accept the statement of Srimad Bhagavatam because it is accepted by spiritual leaders like Sridhar Swami, Jiva Goswami, Vishwanath Chakravarti and others. And this is the way of education. Even in the material education realm, knowledge is accepted based on an authority. Although people claim, or although it's generally propagated that scientific knowledge means it must be understood through one's own senses. But actually, even these people, they do not do that. Knowledge can be propagated only by an authority. Knowledge is not learned by experimentation. It's learned by propagation, by an authority. So, whatever knowledge exists now is mundane because people who are propagating it, they have no factual knowledge themselves because their knowledge is limited by their senses. But people or the great devotees who accept a statement of Srimad Bhagavatam and other Vedic literatures, they have perfect knowledge because they are from the authentic books of knowledge which was saved by Matsyadev, or which came from the mouth of an authority like Lord Brahma. And it is also accepted by spiritual leaders like Sridhar Swami, Jiva Goswami, Vishwanath Chakravarti and other acharyas. And that way the knowledge is propagated. So therefore it is perfect. And if you remember, Srila Prabhupada also wrote in, I think, 5th chapter or before that, before that, one of the first 4 chapters, he writes that knowledge is, the living entity has to accept knowledge either from the scientists or from authorities or from Vedic literatures. Okay, I think it's the second chapter, 35th verse only, right? Anyways, I think it's from second chapter where Srila Prabhupada writes this. He says the living entity is completely dependent. Bhagavatam. It's in Bhagavatam, in this canto only, I don't remember which chapter. He says that the living entity is dependent, and to gain knowledge, he should accept the authority either of the material scientists or of the Vedic literatures. And it makes much more sense to accept the authority of Vedic literatures than the material scientists because they themselves are imperfect. Whereas those who are accepting the Vedic authorities, they are perfect because just by looking at these authorities, we can understand that their life is sublime. Right? That with common sense, we can understand the life of these great devotees, sadhus, these great personalities, that the life is so sublime, and whatever they preach, they have embodied that in their life. Whereas, whatever knowledge you gain from the material scientists, they cannot embody that knowledge. It's all within the 3 modes of material nature. And what do they propagate? They basically propagate that one can become happy through sense gratification. Correct? That's the whole goal, that's the whole purpose of material advancement, material scientists, technology and other things. But what do we see? We do not see people becoming happy by engaging in sense gratification. So this line of knowledge which comes from the material scientists or from materialistic people, it's actually not perfect, which is evident because people become more and more frustrated when they engage in their line of thought, of gaining knowledge, of performing activities, engaging in sense gratification. Ultimately, it leads that only to frustration. So therefore, it's a false. Any person with some common sense can understand the knowledge or the process which is following in the line of disciplic succession of this materialistic scientist is useless. Whereas one which comes in proper disciplic succession from the Lord through the great acharyas, it is perfect because we ourselves can understand that it is susukham kartam avayam. It's so happy when we perform these activities, and we can also see the lives of the great acharyas, how their life is so sublime. So that way, knowledge, we can understand which one is better. The personality of God had assumed the incarnation of Nrsimhadev in order to vanquish the great fears of the demigods. He killed the king of the demons, Hiranyakashipu, who challenged the Lord with a club in his hand by placing the demon on his thighs and piercing him with his nails, rolling his eyebrows in anger and showing his fearful teeth and mouth. The leader of the elephants, whose leg was attacked in a river by a crocodile of superior strength, was much aggrieved. Taking a lotus flower in his trunk, he addressed the Lord, saying, O original enjoyer, Lord of the universe, O deliverer, as famous as a place of pilgrimage, all are purified simply by hearing your holy name, which is worthy to be chanted. It's a very, very amazing prayer actually. Srila Prabhupada speaks a lot about this. He's Tirtha Shrava, he's Shravana Mangala, he's Namadheya. He's as famous as the place of pilgrimage. His Shravana Mangala, all good can be achieved simply by hearing his name. And his Namadheya, because his holy name is worth chanting. There are so many words which are chanted in this material world, but the only name or the only word worth chanting is the holy name of the Lord, Namadheya. And he's Adipurusha, okay. So he's Adipurusha, that's also mentioned here. It's Adipurusha Akhila Lokanatha. It's Adipurusha, Akhila Lokanatha, is Tirtha Shrava, Shravana Mangala and Namadheya. Although an elephant is generally stronger than a crocodile, the latter is stronger than an elephant when it is in the water. Okay, so that's why the elephant is struggling here. So now this purport, Srila Prabhupada takes each and every word and he explains that about Adipurusha, Akhila Lokanatha, Tirtha Shrava and Shravana Mangala. So he says Adipurusha, he is the original enjoyer and the sons of subsequent enjoyers. Yeah. He's the Adipurusha. Adipurusha, when he says, he makes a meaning, he's the original enjoyer. Adipurusha can also mean that he is the original person. But in this context, Purusha means enjoyer. So he is the original enjoyer. And living entities are subordinate enjoyers. Only when the Lord enjoys, then the living entity also enjoy. If the Lord is not enjoying, the living entity will not enjoy. So therefore, the Lord is always enjoying. Okay, the enjoyment of the Lord is unlimited and it's uninterrupted. The Lord is always enjoying. So when we come, we do devotional service, we come in contact with the Lord, then we also take part, we also participate in the Lord's enjoyment. It automatically happens because the Lord is always happy, Krishna is always happy. So when we come in contact with Krishna, we also become automatically happy. So it's automatically it happens. But when we specifically try to become happy after disassociating with Krishna, after cutting our connection with Him, then we have to struggle for our existence, struggle for happiness. Srila Prabhupada writes, right, this struggle for happiness is there because it is not automatically gained, it's not naturally gained. The struggle is there. The struggle is there because we are trying to do something artificially. Whenever you try to do something artificially, then there's a struggle for that. But something which is very natural, there is no struggle for it. Like we have even within our experience, if there is something that we can do very easily, it comes very naturally to us, we don't struggle for that. But now something is very difficult for us to do, then we struggle to do that. We have to put so much effort. We have to put so many things to learn something new. So struggle is there to do something which does not come naturally. For the living entity, naturally he is a devotee of Krishna. Naturally he is connected to Krishna all the time. So therefore happiness also comes to him naturally because Krishna is always happy. And enjoyment comes to him naturally because Krishna is always enjoying. So whatever we want to achieve, or the living entity has a desire to be eternal, to gain knowledge. So who has more knowledge than Krishna? You come in contact with Krishna, automatically we gain knowledge. Who is more happy than Krishna? You come in contact with Krishna, we are automatically happy. So this is what we are supposed to do. But bewildered by the modes, we somehow think that we can be independent enjoyers. We can become happy independently. This is bogus. A living being cannot even touch a thing which is not allotted to him. So therefore he cannot enjoy it. So the enjoyment, the separate enjoyment from the Lord also is ordained by the Lord. When so-called material enjoyment, a little bit of happiness, this chapala sukha that we get in this material world, that also we can gain only when Krishna says, okay Baba, you take, do some enjoyment, fine. But that also, because it's not in connection with the Lord, it's in connection with this material energy, which is Bahiranga Shakti of the Lord. There's no direct connection, we suffer. So one who knows this difference between the Lord and himself never accepts anything without first offering it to the Lord. So that way the connection is established. When we offer something to the Lord, we are acknowledging his presence. So the connection between the living entity and the Lord is established through that object or through whatever we are trying to offer to the Lord. So that way, because the connection is established, heart is automatically satisfied. The Lord is Akhila Lokhanatha, the Lord of the universe. The Lord is the protector of everyone, but he is the first protector of one who acknowledges the superiority of the Lord, instead of being so falsely proud as to deny the superiority of the Lord or to claim to be equal to him. Since the Lord is superior to everyone, his protection is also superior. No one can imagine it. And I think there's one point which Srila Prabhupada makes here, that okay. So even for those person who denies the existence of the Lord and declares himself the Lord is called Asura, and as such he is given protection by the strength of limited power subject to the sanction of the Lord, which means he is protected by the material energy of the Lord. Limited protection is given. Tirtha Shravaha means as famous as a place of pilgrimage. One can be freed from all sinful reactions simply by remembering his holy name. The Lord is therefore as good as the holy place of pilgrimage. Because just by remembering his name, all sinful reactions are mitigated. Generally, it's thought places of pilgrimage is for removing one's sinful reactions. Okay, those reactions, even if he's a dharmic person, those reactions which he has accumulated out of committing sinful activities inadvertently or without being mindful of them. So therefore, people will go to these Tirtha Yatras and then remove their sinful reactions. But it can all happen just by chanting the holy name. Sit in the same place, chant Hare Krishna, all sins are eradicated. Now, of course, we should take care of the offense also, that we do not engage in sinful activities and at the same time chant the holy name. One who commits sinful acts consciously cannot be worthy of being a devotee of the Lord. But a pure devotee who unconsciously does something sinful is certainly delivered by the Lord, because a pure devotee remembers the Lord always. So one who remembers the Lord always is beyond the three modes, is beyond any sinful actions and reactions. Actually, he is beyond not only sinful activities, but beyond any activity, any karmic activity, because he is remembering of the Lord always. The Lord is Shravana Mangala, and he comes to create the subject matter for hearing and chanting. So this is the purpose for his Leela. We discussed this, right? He comes for delivering his pure devotees. And how does he deliver? By enacting such glorious pastimes, he gives an opportunity to his pure devotees that they can recount those pastimes by hearing about them, by chanting about them. And that way he purifies them. And that way he delivers his pure devotees. Modern fictions and novels agitate the young mind unnecessarily and increase the mode of passion and ignorance, leading to increased bondage to material conditions. This is there in the first or second chapter we saw, right? First chapter, that there are so many things to hear in this material world, right? What is that? Nam Shanti Sahasrasaha, Apashyatam Atmatattvam, Griya Shukra. Shrota Vyadini Rajendra, Nrinam Shanti Sahasrasaha, Apashyatam Atmatattvam, Griya Shukra Medinam. So there are thousands and millions and trillions of things to hear. But then, what these things will do is agitate the young mind unnecessarily and increase the mode of passion and ignorance. which increases the bondage in the material condition. Okay. The personality of Godhead, after hearing the elephant's plea, felt that the elephant needed his immediate help, for he was in great distress. Thus, at once the Lord appeared there on the wings of the king of birds, Garuda, fully equipped with his weapon, the wheel, Chakra. With the wheel, he cut to pieces the mouth of the crocodile to save the elephant, and he delivered the elephant by lifting him by his trunk. Okay. Very nice. He delivered the elephant by lifting him. Such a powerful elephant. He was the king of elephants, and the Lord lifted him by his trunk. So amazing to just even imagine this. So here we see, Lord Brahma is speaking about this pastime in two. I think in the third verse also it comes, is it? No, in two verses. And it's important to note that elephant, he's considered a dumb animal, actually. Okay, and the Lord is so merciful that the elephant is, there are so many living entities, or there are so many animals who are attacked by other ferocious animals and they are killed in the forest. But in this specific case, even if an animal, a dumb animal like an elephant, if he prays to the Lord personally comes, sitting on the back of Garuda with his 800 form, all his weapons included, and then he saves that dumb animal also. Okay, so again, this will come in further in the subsequent verses, where Lord Brahma will say that everybody should take shelter of the Lord, including the birds and beasts, and they can also be delivered by the Lord. Srila Prabhupada will write that in the purport. So this is a classic example. Normally, animals will not have the consciousness to pray to the Lord like this, but by their previous pious activities, if they get the remembrance of the Lord, they will also be delivered by the Lord personally. So that way, this pastime is actually very glorious, very amazing. Modern scientists have invented airships which are material, and yogis make a still final material attempts to travel by mind ship. The yogis can teach anything mind ships. Okay, so Lord decides. He's speaking about the Vaikuntha planet here. The Lord resides in Vaikuntha planet, but the modern scientists, by their material airships, cannot know or cannot go there. And specifically this point is made here because elephant is there with this material world, but the Lord is there in the Vaikuntha. And how can the elephant's prayer be heard by the Lord who is so far away? So these things cannot be calculated by human imagination. All this was possible by the unlimited power of the Lord. Therefore, the Lord is described here as Aprameya, for not even the best human brain can estimate his powers and potencies by mathematical calculation. And Ishopanishad explains that he can hear everything, he can move faster than the mind and do all those things. Right? So inconceivable, no? We have nothing in experience within our material experience which confirms with the qualities that the Lord possesses. The qualities of the Lord are so inconceivable and so mind-blowing, so to speak, that we have not heard of anybody like him, or we have not seen anybody like him within our material experience. But these pastimes are authentic, are perfect, and it has happened, and the Lord is so inconceivable. He's been so merciful that he has conducted these pastimes. Amazing. Although he appeared as the youngest of Aditi's sons, so this is Vamanadev's incarnation, known as the Adityas, the Lord still surpassed all their qualities because he is transcendental to all material modes. And because he surpasses all the planets of the universe, he is the supreme personality of Godhead. On the pretense of asking for a measurement of 3 steps of land, he took away all the lands of Bali Maharaj. He asked simply because without begging, no authority can take one's rightful possession. So one who surrenders everything onto the Lord, then instead of losing everything he possessed, he was blessed by the Lord's becoming his constant companion and doorman. And by giving everything to the cause of the Lord, one does not lose anything, but he gains everything that he could never otherwise expect. Okay. So giving to the Lord does not reduce anything, it increases. That's why charity should be given for the sake of the Lord. This was discussed in yesterday's class also. Chitai Prabhu mentioned that in his Bhagavatam class. That one should give to the Lord, and that way, he does not become a loser, he gains everything. Bali Maharaj, who put on his head the water washed from the lotus feet of the Lord, did not think of anything beside his promise. in spite of being forbidden by his spiritual master. The king dedicated his own personal body to fulfilling the measurement of the Lord's third step. For such a personality, even the kingdom of heaven, which he conquered by strength, was of no value. So when he gave up himself, he gave up everything that he possessed also. Anyway, it was taken by the Lord in the first two steps. Then he gave himself. So Lord's special favor is snatching one's hard-earned material possessions. That is a special favor. So Bali Maharaj was not at all the loser. And when the Lord snatches away one's hard-earned material possession and favors one with personal transfer service for eternal life, bliss and knowledge, such taking away by the Lord should be considered a special favor upon such a pure devotee. So which verse is this? Do you know? Yasyaham anugrahanami harishe tadhanam shanai. His relatives run away from him. Okay, when it is that. So all material possessions are temporary, and that the best use of these possessions to engage them in the service of the Lord. Okay, so Srila Prabhupada writes about civilization of sense gratification as compared to civilization of the soul. Oh, there are so many things that we can discuss in this purport. Okay, therefore one should possess less or nothing, so that one may be free from artificial prestige. This is about material possessions. He is saying that one should possess less or nothing, so that he is free from artificial prestige. And to achieve this stage of life, one must be firmly convinced about spiritual existence and its permanent effects. So one can possess less or nothing and be satisfied with that only when he has spiritual assets or spiritual possession. Those who does not have spiritual possession, they cannot be satisfied with less or no material possession. So this again, the example of Sridhar comes to the mind from Chaitanya Charitamrita. He had no possession, was completely satisfied. Even Gaur Kishore Das Babaji, no possession, completely satisfied. So one should not create artificial needs. Artificial needs of life are activities of the senses. It's a civilization of sense gratification. Creating artificial needs is a civilization of sense gratification, whereas perfect civilization is a civilization of Atma. Civilization means where people are civil, where people are cultured. Civilization means a society of cultured people, and cultured people know the purpose of the creation. Again, coming back to the same point. So therefore they civilization is engaged in the purpose of Atma, not in sense gratification. So there are two information, Prabhupada writes, that there is a primary information of the kingdom of God, where it's informed that there is no sun, no moon, no electricity, which are all necessary for in the material world of darkness. Tad bhasite suryo shashanko na pavaka yadgatva nivartante tadhama paramam mama. So this is the primary information of the kingdom of Lord. Secondary information is explaining that one can achieve that kingdom by the method of bhakti yoga. Two types of information is there with respect to the kingdom of God. One is the kingdom of God himself. How is that kingdom? How is the spiritual world? And how one can attain it. O Narada, you were taught about the science of God and his transcendental loving service by the personality of Godhead in his incarnation of Hamsa Avatara. He was very much pleased with you due to your intense proportion of devotion service. He also explained unto you lucidly the full science of devotional service, which is especially understandable by persons who are souls surrendered unto Lord Vasudeva, the personality of Godhead. And Srila Prabhupada in the purport gives stages of progress in devotional service by the devotee. And he says that devotee and devotional service are two correlative terms. Preliminary qualification for entering the devotional service of the Lord is that one becomes a willing cooperator. And as such, one should voluntarily cooperate with persons who are already engaged in the transcendental devotional service of the Lord. By cooperating with such persons, the prospective candidate will gradually learn the techniques of devotional service. Okay, so you can relate that to this Shraddha, then Sadhu Sangha, then Bhajana Kriya. And with the progress of such learning, one becomes proportionately free from the contamination of material association. Then there's Anartha Nivritti. Okay. Then such a purificatory process will establish the prospective candidate firm faith and free from this asakti, free from material asakti, firm faith. Then nishtha, gradually elevate him to the stage of transcendental taste for such devotional service. Ruchi, then you have this bhava, prema, like this. Thus he acquires a genuine attachment for the devotional service of the Lord, and his conviction carries him to the point of ecstasy. So this is nishtha, attachment for the devotional service of the Lord, and conviction carries him to the point of ecstasy, bhava, just prior to the stage of transcendental love, prema. So even though Prabhupada did not mention any of these words, just by reading the purport we can understand. It's basically explaining this process of devotional service here. That's all. So this is the stages of progress in devotional service by the devotee. Two sections of transcendental knowledge in devotional service. Knowledge of devotional service may be divided into two sections, namely preliminary knowledge and secondary knowledge of its execution, means Sambandha and Abhideya. Okay. So devotional service, knowledge of devotional service is when we gain the knowledge and then we implement that knowledge. We affect that knowledge. This is what we were discussing before. And Bhagavatam is in relation with the personality of Godhead. Its beauty, fame, opulences, dignity, attraction and transcendental qualities which attract one towards him for exchange of love and affection. Then Srimad Bhagavatam helps one very genuinely remove the artificial covering due to material association. Okay. As the incarnation of Manu, the Lord became the descendant of the Manu dynasty and ruled over the miscreant kingly order, subduing them by his powerful wheel weapon. Undeterred in all circumstances, his rule was characterized by glorious fame, which spread over the three lokas and above them to the planetary system Satyaloka, the topmost in the universe. So again, this Manvantara incarnation we have already discussed in the first canto. So I'll just go ahead. The Lord in his incarnation of Dhanvantari very quickly cures the diseases of the ever diseased living entities simply by his fame personified, and only because of him do the demigods achieve long lives. Thus the personality of Godhead becomes ever glorified. He also exacted a share from the sacrifices, and it is he only who inaugurated the medical science or the knowledge of medicine in the universe. So the Lord cures the diseases of body, mind and soul in all the ways. It is understood in this verse that medical science was inaugurated by personality of Godhead, Dhanvantari, and recorded in the Vedas, which is your Ayurveda. So the disease of birth and death is also there. So that also is removed by the grace of the personality of Godhead. Then by the grace of the Lord, not only are diseases of the body and mind cured, but also the soul is relieved of the constant repetition of birth and death. The name of the Lord is also called Bhavaushadhi, or the source of curing the disease of material existence. When the ruling administrators, who are known as the Kshatriyas, turned astray from the path of absolute truth, with desires to suffer in hell, the Lord in his incarnation as the sage Parashuram uprooted those unwanted kings who appeared as the thorns of the earth. Thus he thrice 7 times uprooted the Kshatriyas with his keenly sharpened chopper. So 21 times he did. So who is liable to be punished? So Srila Prabhupada makes a couple of important points. He says, irrespective of which type of government it is, monarchy, democracy, oligarchy or dictatorship or autocracy, everybody has the prime responsibility to lead the citizens toward God realization. Persons going against the prescribed rules and regulations for those in conditioned life are called Brahmojita Pathas, or those going against the path of absolute truth, and they are liable to be punished. It's the duty of the administrators to lead the citizens towards God realization, and one who does not do that is called as Brahmojita Pathas. Those going against the path of the absolute truth, they are liable to be punished. And he says, the kings of Egypt, they are the ones who migrated from India because of Parshuram's program of chastisement. So they ran away, they were not killed by Parshuram, and they became the kings of Egypt. And other places, it's even mentioned, other places in Europe also. Those who went to the west, they are the kings scared of Parshuram. Okay. Anyways, what Lord Parshuram we have already seen in the first canto. This is about Lord Ramachandra. Due to his causeless mercy upon all living entities within the universe, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, along with his plenary extensions, appeared in the family of Maharaj Ikshvaku as the lord of his internal potency Sita. Under the order of his father, Maharaj Dashrath, he entered the forest and lived there for considerable years with his wife and younger brother. Ravana, who was very materially powerful with 10 heads on his shoulders, committed a great offense against him and was thus ultimately vanquished. Srila Prabhupada speaks that all 4 brothers are Vishnu Tattvas and were never ordinary human beings. But some people think that only Lord Ramachandra was the Supreme Lord, others are living entities. He condemns them here. He says they are foolish. Okay. So this is, we will discuss this. Durga is the external potency of the Lord and she is associated with Lord Shiva. So Sita is the internal potency of the Lord and external potency is Durga Devi. So Sita associates with Lord Vishnu, Durga Devi associates with Lord Shiva. Then he recounts the pastimes of Lord Ramachandra and he says the materialists who are after opulence and material prosperity may take lessons from the Ramayana that the policy of exploiting the nature of the Lord without acknowledging the supremacy of the Supreme Lord is the policy of Ravana. Basically, the nature of the Lord. Ravana tried to enjoy the internal potency of the Lord. This is the nature of the Lord. And those who are engaged in exploiting the external potency of the Lord without acknowledging the presence of the Lord, who want money, opulences, they really desire Lakshmi Devi. They are following the policy of Ravana, following in Ravana's footsteps. Okay, Shri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, the Smriti says, it's there in Padma Purana, that Narsimha, Rama and Krishna are complete with all good qualities, or basically they are the complete manifestation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, these 3, of which Krishna is the original personality of Godhead, because they exhibited the maximum potency of the Supreme Lord, the glories of the Supreme Lord. The personality of Godhead Ramachandra, being agreed for his distant, intimate friend Sita, Suhrit, glanced over the city of the enemy Ravana with red-hot eyes like those of Hara, who wanted to burn the kingdom of heaven. The great ocean, trembling in fear, gave him his way, because its family members, the aquatics like the sharks, snakes and crocodiles, were being burned by the heat of the angry red-hot eyes of the Lord. This again comes in the 9th canto, when we speak about Lord Ramachandra, how he subdued the ocean. So the subduing of ocean is it's considered as one of the principal activities of the Lord. It's mentioned multiple times in Bhagavatam. And this is because the ocean is considered unfathomable. Or when one goes to an ocean, or when, we have not been, but if we go to in a ship to the middle of the ocean, if not even middle, but far away from the land, the ocean looks extremely dangerous, invincible. Okay, it's unfathomable. The depths of the ocean, the vastness of the ocean, the waves of the ocean, and the rocking of the boat, the ship in that ocean. It looks very, very overwhelming. But Lord Ramachandra was so potent just by his eyes, just by his red hot eyes, he was able to make the ocean tremble in fear. Because all the great aquatics like sharks, those big sharks, whales, snakes and crocodiles within the ocean, they were completely, they were getting burned by the heat of the angry red hot eyes of the Lord. So Srila Prabhupada writes this here, that that no mundane red hot eye can generate heat in the great ocean. Right? Okay. So no incarnation of, or those cheap incarnation of the Lord is another test for them. The Lord Ramachandra, he was able to subdue the ocean. You come, let's go to the ocean and we will see. You subdue the ocean, then we shall see. We shall accept you as the incarnation of the Lord. That's cheap. What can they do? Nonsense. Yeah, the sentiments of the chief eternal are different quality from the sentiments of the dependent eternals, he says. And he says, no, it's a good point. Impersonals will see havoc in this red hot sentiment of the Lord because they want to see negation in perfection. So they will also see the red hot sentiment of the Lord. because they want to negate the personality of the Lord. So they become offensive to the Lord. Had Lord Ramchandra's sentiment been of mundane origin, how could it disturb the whole ocean and its inhabitants? Can any mundane red-hot eye generate heat in the great ocean? These are factors to be distinguished in terms of the personal and impersonal conceptions of the absolute truth. The absolute truth is the source of everything. So the absolute person cannot be devoid of the sentiments that are reflected in the temporary, mundane world. So, but he still is transcendental. So even though red hot eye, we were discussing that the Lord is not affected by lust and wrath. But here we see that the Lord Ramchandra had his red hot eyes as if to burn the whole ocean. But this is not an expression of anger or dissatisfaction of his lust. He has sentiments, but they are absolute. When Ravana, so you see, Lord Ramchandra's pastimes, 3 verses are there. When Ravana was engaged in the battle, the tusks of the elephant which carried the king of heaven, Indra, broke into pieces, having collided with the chest of Ravana, and the scattered broken parts illuminated all directions. Ravana therefore felt proud of his prowess and began to loiter in the midst of the fighting soldiers, thinking himself the conqueror of all directions. But his laughter, overtaken by joy, along with his very life air, or rather air of life, suddenly ceased with the twangling sound of the bow of Ramchandra, the personality of Godhead. Okay, this is poetic way of saying, because Ravana was not killed only by twangling of Lord Ramchandra's bow, but the Lord was so much more powerful and potent that this person, this Ravana, this Rakshasa Ravana, even though he could subdue Indra, who is glorified in all the Vedic literatures as a great personality who carries Vajra in his hand, he could not do anything to Ravana, but just by twangling of Lord Ramchandra's bow, then all his opulence was completely vanquished. Very nice poetic way of saying this. So however powerful a living being may be, when he is condemned by God, no one can save him. And similarly, however weak one may be, if he is protected by the Lord, no one can annihilate him. Rake Krishna Marike, Mare Krishna Rakeke, this is Prabhupada used to tell this. It's actually there in one of the purports Prabhupada writes in Chaitanya Charitamrita, this class. Okay, so do you have any questions? It's a straightforward chapter till now. So, fine, right? Okay, so we'll stop and we'll continue from 26th verse in the next session. Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Gaur Premanand.